I'm not saying nuclear is bad. I'm saying it's high risk. In some cases, it's less than 5% is nutritious. If it's grown very, very far away, harvested before it's ripe, and then shipped, and this is a live product consuming its own sugar and minerals and vitamins on the way, you end up, it's exponential. You get almost nothing out of it. We need to use less energy. That helps our chances of shifting to better energy. Plants are healthier themselves because they're getting everything they need from a natural system. Well, the climate is changing in the US just like it is everywhere. And so that's going to have to be a big thing that's taken into account. That means the farmer almanacs become less and less valuable. So I'm not surprised.
If you were not doing sustainable agriculture, what do you call it? Just agriculture, in the field of agriculture?
I mean, I've dedicated myself to CEA, which is Controlled Environment Agriculture. And I think I'm in the process now of slowly letting it go. Because, I'm moving to Brazil on purpose, to go to an ideal climate on purpose. And I'm going to have greenhouses on purpose. They don't have heating or cooling on purpose. And I'm also going to be experimenting with what I can grow outside. And things, we'll get into it.
Tell me about it.
This is what we're going to be talking about.
I think we're in it. We're just kind of in a hang here. It's good to catch up with you. I do have a lot of things that I want to talk about with you when it comes to the CEA, regenerative agriculture. Tell us again, what is CEA?
CEA is Controlled Environment Agriculture. And what that means is that you take control of the parameters in the environment that have historically caused people problems. Where the risks come from, where the losses come from, where the unexpected variables are. And that costs money. And we're usually talking about physical measures because traditionally, in the past century, the focus has been on chemical measures. Chemical measures of increasing yield with fertilizers, chemical measures of reducing pest loss and damage through poison. And now we build boxes so that we don't necessarily have to use as much water, as much fertilizer, or as much, or hopefully any pesticides. And that has done wonders for kind of like stabilizing food production, bringing it local. And a big element of it is the fact that we want to eat things that don't come from here. We want to eat them out of season. And a big part of what CEA does for people as well is reduce food miles. That's something that like you and I care about, I want to have bananas, I want to have mangoes, but they won't be fresh and tasty if they come from very far away. They will cost more because of the transport, and they'll have, a carbon input to the atmosphere that you and I don't really love to know is happening. So CEA brings things closer to home. It means you can get fresher, things that are picked ripe closer to you and on demand and stuff like that. But it's intensive. The structure costs a lot of money. The systems cost a lot of money. Everything about it takes energy. We're reducing some of the inputs like water and fertilizer, like I said, but others are higher. The field is not taking any electricity outside of maybe a pump if you're trying to get around, sporadic rain patterns.
So is CEA an example would be a greenhouse?
A greenhouse is a great example. That's the most common type of CEA you'll see, but there's dozens and dozens of types of greenhouses with different pros and cons, different considerations that went into designing them, and each one is going to be more or less ideal for a specific place with its characteristic climate and even, let's say, labor availability, resource availability, everything factors into this. That's why it's hard for most people to plan these projects, and that's why I have a job.
Yeah, when you come into one of these projects, maybe you're coming in from the very start. That's probably best case. Nothing's been really...
That is the best case, because we get to avoid issues. We get to mitigate risk by design from the start. We're not solving problems after they happen. We're working them out of the equation by making smart choices from the get-go.
What are some of those things that you're looking for in the very beginning? So you take on a new project, let's say it's starting from zero.
Starting from zero, you want to make sure that the client, in other words, the person who's taking on this risk, understands what they're getting into, has the right motivations, and is looking in the right direction. So a lot of people will come to me and say, hey, I want to build a vertical farm. Can you help me? And the first part of the conversation is making sure that they actually want a vertical farm and they know why, and that is what they want and need. And there's not, for example, a greenhouse that will serve their goals better.
And a vertical farm being like shelves of plants?
There's a lot of formats, but when I say it, I mean total control, indoors in an insulated warehouse usually, where you are completely controlling the environment very tightly, which costs money, and big HVAC systems, and you're also delivering all the light yourself. So nothing happens that you don't actually contribute.
Where are these CEAs doing the best right now? Like, what's the best use case for one of these farms?
Well, a lot of places, but let's start with where they're doing the worst. Let's get that out of the way. Because northern latitudes, where there's long winters, heavy snow loads, extreme temperature swings, low light for months, things like that, that's where vertical farms have been the most viable. Like, they make the most sense when you're just planning it, because in greenhouses, getting the light equals not having insulation. You know what I mean? Like, it's a balance between like getting as much natural light as possible, so that because it's free, but also it's heating the space, so you want to cool the space when it's too hot. And then it gets cold and there's no light, but you have a roof that lets in light, and it's not letting in any light because there isn't any, but it also doesn't have any insulation, because that would have reduced the light when you did have it. That's where we're seeing vertical farms and greenhouse companies fail. North America and Europe, a lot, unfortunately. And these are places that truly are kind of most dependent on other parts of the world for fresh fruits and greens and things like that. They do pretty well with grains.
So they're setting up greenhouses and there's just not a lot of light.
Yeah, it's complicated over there. It's intensive. It's expensive to do that, but it's where it has the most viability. People look at that and they say, okay, it's worth spending money here because there's a lot of people, they got to eat, and traditional agriculture doesn't deliver year-round food well. Where CEA is actually doing the best is the equatorial world. However, that CEA looks very different than the stuff that I just mentioned.
What's that, the equatorial world?
Around the equator, like between the tropics, you know, where you have an abundance of light year-round. You have plenty of rain reliably, you know, like predictable seasons, let's say, not extreme swings. And that means that CEA takes on its most basic forms. First of all, cost of living is cheaper there, food is cheaper there, so you can't spend as much to grow it or else you won't make any money. But just simple things like screens will keep a swarm of locusts out if it happens to come by. It's a very simple thing, it just sits there, you buy it once in 10 years. The basic greenhouses, like what I'm going to do in Brazil, are essentially just to diffuse light a little bit, improve its distribution on the plants so that they can be a little bit more comfortable and grow, and keep the rain off, because it doesn't help us to have water on the leaves of the plants. The roots need the water, and you need to control that water. So just having a little bit of a rain shield, a basic greenhouse with screen walls.
Yeah, rain on the leaves, is that what leads to mold and disease?
Absolutely, yeah. Because a lot of pathogens are kind of ubiquitous. They're in the dust, they're everywhere. In some of these total CEA boxes, we filter the air, we try to keep them physically out. But in reality, in nature, they're everywhere, and they're opportunistic. So they're waiting for that moment of the right temperature, droplet on the leaf, so on and so forth. And there's simple, relatively much cheaper things we can do to just lower that risk completely.
So around the equator, that's where these CEAs are doing the best.
Mm-hmm.
What does the future of CEAs look like with our changing climate, with water kind of becoming more and more of a consideration, it drying up in many places? What's the importance of CEAs in our future?
So CEA took us out of that era of just unpredictability. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe the swarm will come eat everything. Maybe the wind will sweep it away. Maybe the rain will mold everything. I have no idea. Farmers were taking an immense risk every year, even though they worked hard every year and they spent a lot of money every year. They didn't always get a return. So CEA kind of stabilized that situation, but now we've had it going on for several decades, and we know what its flaws are. It's unsustainable in ways. Not everywhere is the energy that you're using coming from a sustainable source. In most cases, the fertilizer is completely unsustainable, things like that. So where it's going is it has to get down to brass tacks. CEA needs to be very site-specific, needs to be appropriate, needs to be lean. It needs to be the minimum viable solution. You know what I mean? And that means that you're not going to see as many fancy, new, novel, exciting types of farms come up anymore, because those are the ones that all failed.
We saw that famously with huge brands that had hundreds of millions of dollars, and they all seemed to fail.
Right.
Plenty comes to mind.
Yeah.
Browers, is that one?
Bowery,
thank
Harvest,
you.
so on and so forth. There's a long list now, and they're all sad stories, but the best thing we can do is not miss the lesson from those.
What was going on with those? Were they not communicating with each other? Was it all very in a secretive way? How could they all raise so much money and all fail in the same way?
That was something characteristic of all of them. They all wanted to operate in a silo. They all were very guarded and acted like, they were doing something novel that nobody else knew anything about. And so they shut down lines of communication between them and their peers and their competitors. And that is what it is. But generally speaking, they focused more on IP and barriers to entry and like having something new and novel and patentable than they focused on just getting the job done, which is growing food for a profit, meeting the demand. So that's out, and investors are very, very wary of things like that now when they see something like, hey, I've got a brand new system of doing this in a way nobody's ever done it before. Who cares?
Why wasn't it, I'm sure they were selling the investors that they can make it profitable.
Right.
Why wasn't it profitable? Was the machinery just way too expensive? Was there actually way more human labor than they expected?
Well, each one of them is a very special case. But again, we're going to talk generally here because that would take way too much time. They made bad choices. They made bad choices on sometimes locations. They made bad choices on structures. They made bad choices on systems, genetics, methodologies, personnel. They made a lot of bad choices. And bad choices in any line of work will kill your business if they're repeated too much and, you get too far in. That's why what I do at Culty Bio, me and my team, is we help people make good choices. And ideally, we're starting at the very beginning where it's like, let's plan this to succeed. But more often, quite frankly, we come in the middle of someone is having an existential crisis of like, I'm going to have to shut this business down if I can't figure out what to do about the problems that have been designed in through ignorance or, God forbid, sometimes malice. Mostly just complacency, though, because there's a lot of companies creating solutions and they want to make money. They want to spend as little as possible to create the solutions and get as much money as possible out of it for as long as possible. So they have armies of salespeople. And salespeople are not bad people, but they have a job to do, to convince you that what their company makes is the best thing for you. You're not who they're really looking out for. That doesn't help them make a living and feed their families. They're looking out for the bottom line of their company. So the story is always the same for them, is, of course, what we have is the best thing for you. And if you don't know better and you believe them because they're generally an honest person, you can end up in a place where you made a wrong choice and there's no recovering from that in the same direction. You got to turn around. And sometimes that's expensive.
So salespeople, in what way are you referring to? People selling the greenhouses, selling the automation equipment?
All of it,
Everyone's saying, hey, this is the best solution for you, even though it might not really be. And you're helping to parse out, hey, here is the best solution for you because a greenhouse in Chicago needs something a lot different than a greenhouse in Denver.
If you're not prepared, if you don't know enough about the subject matter, then you need advocates to examine everything that's being offered to you. I mean, you're bombarded with, you have so many options. And someone who knows how the pieces all fit together can help guide you and say that, like, well, if you're here, then this is the best choice. If you make this choice, then it follows that you have to make this one to be compatible and not have the problems that you can have by making the wrong choices and having the wrong combinations.
Hey, I just wanted to jump in here and give a quick shout out to the sponsor of today's podcast, B Micro, the easiest way to sneak vegetables into any meal. Due to soil depletion, GMOs, and monocropping, Americans are not getting enough nutrients. So in 2018, I founded B Micro, the first freeze-dried microgreens company in the US to help Americans get more concentrated natural nutrients into their diet. Microgreens are a phase in the plant's life when they're 14 days old and naturally the most concentrated in vitamins, minerals, nutrients, all the good things that we need. Our microgreens are grown here in the US in soil and a greenhouse. They're certified USDA organic and regenerative organic. We grow, wash, and freeze dry them to extend their 1 week shelf life to over 1 year, allowing us to ship anywhere in the US without the worry of spoilage. We have 2 flavors, broccoli, backed by over 2,000 studies on sulforaphane and its powerful detox benefits, and a blend of red cabbage, radish, and broccoli, the most potent detox formula we've tested, offering you the most bang for your buck. Easily sneak these microgreens in any meal. Eggs, smoothies, pizza, pasta, even your kids' mac and cheese, you can't even taste it. Use code STEVE15 to save at bmicro.farm.
Is there a average client for you? Is it someone that is already started their greenhouse and they are wanting to grow lettuce and they have some or no background in farming, or can you help me understand, maybe who's the average person you're working with?
The average client of Culty Bio's historically is medium-sized farms. So 5,000 to 20,000 square feet. It's less common that we'll work with smaller ones than that. It's less common that we'll work with much larger ones than that. And yeah, most commonly it's existing farms that have existing infrastructure, have teams, staff, and are experiencing issues that are arising from their inability to meet the projections that they had in the business plan, that they got their money on the basis of. And the first hardest task is figuring out exactly what is causing those results, what is contributing to this. It's usually more than one thing. And there's usually voices contradicting that. No, it couldn't be that. Let's just be honest with ourselves. Let's follow the evidence, the data. This is not, people get personal about this when they put a lot of hard work into things or when they put a lot of money into things. They feel attached to them. They get escalation of commitment, which is I've already gotten this deep into this, and I'm not dumb, so I must have done the right thing and I should just do more of it. But sometimes people are desperate enough to hire consultants, which means nobody on my team has managed to make a dent here or fix this for me. And I need outside, guns. So then you have to take it as the sensitive situation that it is, which is a bunch of people that care under stress situations, and they're a little bit desperate. So you nitpick it. Basically, it starts with the 20 questions of show me everything, tell me everything, let me hear everyone's perspective, let me look at the evidence, let me come for a site visit and see what's going on here. And then with a systematic approach and basically a process of elimination, I've managed to figure these out. And then it's their choice of okay, here's what the consultant you just hired is saying needs to happen. It costs money, it takes time. Are you going to take the advice that you just paid for and jump into that, have faith that this is the right direction? And the people who do see good results. Sometimes things take time, but it starts turning around. And everyone gets a better morale, and everyone gets more confidence, and they start making more money, and then they get back on track, and they grow. And ideally, the dependency ends at some point. You shouldn't need a consultant forever. This is kind of an acute situation. You go to the doctor, and when you're getting better, you're like, bye, doc.
So what would you say the most common crop is that people are growing in this way, and maybe what's the ideal crop? What are some of the best crops people can be growing in these ways?
Well, there's quite a bit of variety out there, but the most common crops in CEA are tomatoes and cucumbers and leafy greens in general and things like that. There's a lot of peppers and eggplants and things, but less so. And they're generally things that have the most problems outside. So the things that are in high demand, that people buy a lot of by volume, that there's a lot of money in, but that will likely have known problems outside of CEA. So if I tried to grow tomatoes here in a natural environment, I would lose a lot of plants to nematodes, I'd lose a lot of plants to sun scorching, I'd get a lot of product that's imperfect looking because it gets cracks from irregular watering and all sorts of pests and diseases, really. Tomatoes are, especially the varieties that we want to grow, the ones that are marketably valuable, are vulnerable and susceptible to a lot of these problems. So they're the ones that are good candidates to put in that box called CEA. They have a high value, they're in high demand, and they have known problems in traditional systems. So lettuce, for example, not only does it have a lot of pests and diseases and strict requirements and so on and so forth, but grown under some natural conditions, it ends up having a quality that people don't really love. And you see that in cases where, outdoor grown lettuce, let's say, is more bitter because of chemicals that the plant is creating to defend itself against, in this case here, really high UV light. So you grow it in situations where that light spectrum is adjusted, the glazing is taking a lot of that UV out, and you get more tender, sweet lettuce. That is what people actually want.
What is that bitterness? What is the plant creating to protect itself?
Oh, a variety of chemicals in a cocktail. I'm not sure exactly what.
Is any of that harmful to people?
No, not necessarily. In the case of lettuce specifically, one of them is latex. Lettuce is Lactuca sediva. It produces latex in small quantities and things. No, often what tastes bitter and what tastes strong are healthy things. You can still reduce them without removing the health benefits of the plant. But people know what they like. And that's a key to our conversation about the transition from CEA to regenerative agriculture, which requires kind of a big cultural shift. For us to get away from building these boxes next to these urban centers to grow the things that are in high demand that don't grow well there, by definition, that's why we need to have this. What if people started demanding more of the things that do grow well there and less of the things that don't grow well there, so that there's less of a need to build these boxes and put this energy and time and investment into growing those other things, you know? Humanity can adjust its taste, and we have done that. I mean, if you look at over the decades and the centuries and the millennia, what people eat has a lot to do with what's available and what they're influenced to eat, you know? We learn what to eat, as you know, from a young age, through family gatherings, visits to friends' houses, advertisements, so on and so forth, and we develop our palate of like what we think of as food. But before the Europeans got to the Americas, for example, the category that was food looked very different. It didn't have things that came from, like they didn't have apples. Apples came from Kazakhstan. It didn't have a lot of things that, they didn't even have, you know, coconuts or any of the things that originally came from Asia. And there's a lot of things that originally came from Africa, like cassava and so on and so forth. They had corn. It was indigenous to this, so they had a lot of it. And they had a lot of varieties of it, which is super important. Because diversifying in that way, like let's say I'm growing one crop, corn, and I have a lot of varieties of it, it's very unlikely that all of them will succumb to an environmental stress or a pest or a disease. That's the strength of their diversity, like fundamentally so. Like the Peruvians have potatoes. Potatoes also come from here. Squash, beans, things like that. And we'll talk about the Three Sisters. But the Peruvians would grow, you know, upwards of 200 varieties of potatoes every year. Not because every single one of them was the best. Everyone had their favorites. And there were ones that obviously were like more valuable. But those were likely also the most vulnerable ones. The ones that were most likely to fail if something went wrong. Weather didn't cooperate, or some insect showed up, or some virus went through. And then they had the less desirable ones that were kind of like emergency stock. Of like, we don't actually eat those ones unless we don't get the other ones, in which case we're glad we have these. They store well, they defend themselves, yeah. But there was also practices that we need to start learning more about and integrating. We don't necessarily need to go backwards, but we need to learn about history, more specifically of indigenous culture, so we can go forwards properly, sustainably, with everything we've learned as a Western culture, and everything they know. You combine that, and we're very well equipped to go through the future. So, for example, they would grow corn, which is great. You love corn. I love corn. It's wonderful. It requires fertilizer, and it requires weed control. So they would also grow beans with them. The beans are a climbing plant. They would climb the corn. So the corn is actually offering a trellis structure to the beans. The beans family has an interesting relationship with certain microbes that fix nitrogen in the root zone. So that actually pulls in fertilizer from the air and gives it to the corn. Squash stays low. It's not covering the corn. It's not covering the beans. It stays low, but it covers the weeds. And weeds can overpower beans. They can, tangle with corn. They can basically attract pest species. Some of those pests have viruses. So the Three Sisters is just like a known kind of folklore example of using three plants, and you're getting three foods out of it, and they're all benefiting each other. And now you don't need fertilizer or nitrogen. You don't need herbicide. And you're doing more with less. But obviously, that's not conducive to having a giant tractor go mow everything up and treat it like it's one thing. So we're going to have to give up some of those things. We've perfected mass production. And two things have happened out of that. We've lowered the average nutrient content of food. food on average is not as rich in the things that humans need to be healthy as it used to be.
Any thoughts on that shift, on the difference? Is it a quarter as nutritious, half as nutritious?
In some cases, it's less than 5% as nutritious. If it's grown very, very far away, harvested before it's ripe, and then shipped, and this is a live product consuming its own sugar and minerals and vitamins on the way, you end up like it's exponential. You get almost nothing out of it. Apples that are a year
It might
old.
look and taste like an apple, but there's none of the nutrients in it.
No. If you can look up studies on vitamin C degradation, and that's just looking at one single chemical in one single food. But a fresh apple off the tree is extremely rich in vitamin C. Next day it might have 80%. A week later it might have 50%. And then when you buy it, it's probably months later, you're down to like 5%.
So the freshness is extremely important.
Freshness is extremely key, and that's why, again, like culturally, we're going to have to give up our desires for some of these things that come from far away now. Either we figure out a way to grow them here, which kind of reshuffles the global economy. Like some companies in Holland, they're working on growing papayas and mangoes and bananas in Holland, which is difficult. I mean, like you have to kind of simulate, recreate the environment that they need. They don't compromise on that. They've evolved for climate. But there's interesting situations where, let's say, there's waste heat. You can build a greenhouse next to a factory that has big machines creating heat, and they use water to cool their machines, so they have waste hot water coming out that they don't need for anything. But you can take it and run it through pipes and heat your greenhouse in cold Holland in the winter for essentially for free after buying the system to do it. And then you can successfully grow these things that usually come from far, far away. So now you've skipped the whole shipping procedure and the cost associated with it. You're picking them ripe. They have more nutritional content. They're going to taste better. It's going to be a better experience. And I think that will go very well for them, once they can scale it up.
And they're thought of as the leaders in CA in the world.
They are leaders in, greenhouse production, And that's a blessing and a curse in a way. Because once you get to be the best at something, through hard work and innovation and consistency and things like that, it's easy to think of yourself that way and then reduce your effort and your innovation, things like that. And so I have seen, the Dutch who have, in some ways, like almost perfected. They have very stringent regulations on even the fertilizer that comes out of the greenhouse. Has to be accounted for, the water usage, everything. But then if you copy that and paste it in Kentucky, for example, you fail. Mm-hmm. That's not taking into consideration that you are in a whole different place now, and you need to, in a way, start from scratch and thinking about what's going to make sense here. They even take their projects to China, and the Chinese learn from that, but then they don't expand. They don't ask them to come back and do it again. They say, all right, well, that was interesting, but we're going to take what we liked from it, and we're going to add what we know works here. We're going to combine those to make something really successful in China. China might be a leader in terms of their expanding CEA. They're building more acres of greenhouse a year than anybody right now. You even have orchards undercover over there. Now, granted, some of it is because their industrial revolution was later and faster, and they had some ecosystem collapses to the point where they didn't even have pollinators to pollinate some of their fruit. And so they started working on drones to do that, and people were doing it by hand. But they've also put apples and cherries and things like that in giant greenhouses that maybe don't have a super tight control. They don't need to. They just keep the hail off of it. They keep extreme winds off of it. They reduce the risk of early frost and things like that will, decimate your production. Super interesting.
When you look out into the future, what does farming look like here in the U.S.?
Well, the climate is changing in the U.S. just like it is everywhere, and so that's going to have to be a big thing that's taken into account. We've, in our short lives, we're not yet middle-aged, and we've seen climate zones shift. I mean, they just updated them to where everywhere got a rating that's warmer on average than it used to be for most of this century. So that means that what used to work is not necessarily going to work. That means the farmer almanacs become less and less valuable. You start to look to places that used to be where you're heading. And so America produces more food than it consumes, and it exports a lot of it, and most of that is, low nutrition, high calorie type foods. We need to change that imbalance. We need to focus more on producing fruits and vegetables and displacing a lot of what we import. We import a lot of food as well, and we shouldn't. We shouldn't have to. It's a huge country. We have a bunch of climate zones, but we do also want to decentralize. Because, for example, a lot of the strawberries and lettuce you get in America, for example, come from California and Arizona. And they have challenges there. They have sporadic weather patterns now. They've got water shortages. Some of these big, giant conventional ag companies that have, grown on thousands of acres are starting to experiment with greenhouses, even for things like corn, just to see what the possibilities are and how they can reduce hail damage and wind damage and other crop damage and reduce their inputs and things like this. So CEA is going to grow. It's going to continue to grow. Hopefully it's also going to continue to get more sustainable. There's companies like Renewable who are working on a lot of different things, including fertilizers that are naturally organically derived, like the process of digesting organic waste, garbage, and turning it into a fertilizer that can replace the stuff that we're getting from mines. Also, seed starting material that don't have to come from far away or cause environmental damage, like peat. Peat is a horrible product. Okay, it works really well. That's why we love it.
That's a growing medium?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's basically
like peat moss?
Yeah, peat moss.
Oh.
Yeah, so it comes from moss bogs. Some of them are in Canada, some of them are in Scotland, and that means that they're going with excavators and just digging up, dozens of feet down into these ecosystems that just look like scorched earth afterwards. That can't continue. So there's a lot of people looking for alternatives to that. One good one is cocoa coir. Coconut industry is a large industry around the world. It's not here, obviously. It's not in the U.S., so it's not a local source. But there's waste products from it that have value in horticulture in terms of, like soil alternatives.
Like the husk of it.
Yeah, the husk of it can be processed to make a variety of products. But it's a plant that accumulates salt. In fact, coconuts grow best when they do have sea salt. Their pests don't like it, so they actually accumulate it to try to defend themselves. But that means that the husk is going to have a bunch of salt in it, and salt doesn't help your lettuce or tomatoes grow. It actually, stops them from taking up calcium and iron and things that they need. So different companies will wash, and it takes water to wash several times, their coconut husk more or less. So you got to be aware of what quality you're getting. But if you're in the U.S. and you switch to coconut husk instead of peat moss to be more sustainable, your product's still coming from somewhere else, and it's dependent on those companies, those shipping channels, and that's fragile if we're talking about food security.
Can CEA and regenerative be one and the same? Can CEA be regenerative?
That's what I'm personally going to be looking into stat, because I've come to find that in some ways, the ultimate goal of CEA, which is what I'm specialized in, I've studied a lot of things to get into it, I've done a lot of research, and I've worked for several years in that field. The general philosophy, the general approach is a dead end, ultimately. You know what I mean? Trying to take complete control and simulate nature as if we can do that, as if we understand enough to do that fully, is laughable. It's much better to continue to learn about nature while letting it do what it does and trying to make our goals compatible with it. So regenerative agriculture will intersect with CEA. That's me, for example, getting a very, very basic, cheap greenhouse with as few materials as possible, with no machines in there, no energy going to fans or coolers or heaters or anything like that, and no hydroponic systems, which is what I'm also specialized in. I help other people with that. I'm going to be growing in soil. And I'm going to take the soil of the plots that I've bought, and I'm going to steward them. I'm going to make sure that the soil there is healthier with every passing year. And the inputs that I put into it are not going to be bat guano from Australia. They're not going to be pink salt from Nepal. They're going to be things from my community and the surrounding area and the jungle and whatever I can get my hands on. There's organic matter.
So now you're talking about your greenhouse in Brazil.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that. What will you be? What's the setup? What are you growing?
So from the very start, I have to lean on my strengths, because it has to sustain itself economically, for starters. So I did a market analysis on a lot of crops. I looked at 45 different crop species over there, and I got prices from the local market. I got metrics in terms of like how long this is going to take to grow, how much likely you're going to yield in a worst and best case scenario. And I landed on a few from doing that math. So I'm going to start with cherry and grape tomatoes in one greenhouse, strawberries in another greenhouse, just simply because they sell. I mean, like, there's more demand than supply over there for that. And that just means that whatever you can grow, you can sell for whatever profit margin you achieve based on how well you do.
What do you think the target should be for CEA growers for a margin? What's maybe the minimum to be viable?
Yeah, if you're not making 5%, then you're not moving forward at all. You have to be completely vertically integrated to make something like a 40 to 50% margin. And it's realistic to be somewhere in between that, you know. I'm also doing broccoli and cauliflower, which a lot of people do over there. It's in high demand, and they have seasonal problems. So in the winter there, in that specific climate, everybody's broccoli goes very well. It's cool, but it's not cold, and it's dry. It doesn't rain. In the summertime, the demand doesn't change, but everybody has trouble with their crops. It's warmer, which is not even the biggest problem. The biggest problem is lots of rain. And when you get mature broccoli heads over here, they don't really want to get wet. Or, I mean, we don't want them to get wet because they will rot and mold. And so you go to the market during that season, and it all kind of looks terrible. And it makes you not want to buy as much of it. It makes you not want to pay as much for it. So if you can kind of lead the way and say, hey, everybody, this one thing, keeping the rain off of it, means I don't have this problem. So now I'm the one selling the most of it, commanding the highest price. It's going to be good.
So it's not like an airtight greenhouse.
Not at all.
It's just kind of like a roof.
Yeah, it is.
And what's that roof made out of?
It's polyethylene still at this point, which is not a sustainable product.
And it's the most popular for greenhouse roofs?
It is. It's the cheapest.
And it's the cheapest. And what are the benefits of it over glass? Or, the cheapest, I get that, but can you get more UV? Can you get more?
It generally blocks UV.
Oh.
Which is good and bad in different ways. But you want me to compare it to glass. It's much, much lighter than glass.
I think the average person, I thought most greenhouses were glass.
In Europe, the old ones are. But there's a big shift away from glass for a couple reasons. It's expensive. It's heavy, which means that the structure holding it has to be strong, and that's more metal. It shatters unless you pay even more to get no shatter. So, like, for example, in Holland, they've been dealing with that recently. Places that never did before are having huge hailstorms and tornadoes and things that are taking their beautiful crops inside the greenhouse and covering them with broken glass. So not only do they have, exposed greenhouses now that are compromised, they also have crops full of glass that they have to get rid of, and they have to fix that. And they're trying to decide, like, should I just put the same thing back there or look at other alternatives? And there's people working on other alternatives. There's a company right here in Boulder called Ceres Greenhouses, and they're a really cool company. They specialize in, expensive greenhouses. They give you a lot of control, and they focus a lot on cannabis and botanical gardens and private collectors and things like that. But they're innovators in terms of, efficient, sustainable energy systems and kind of next generation glazings, which is materials that let through light.
I've never thought of having a greenhouse as a private collector.
Yeah.
So there's people out there that just have greenhouses and full gardens in there just
Most
for their
definitely.
own. Wow.
Full of orchids, and you got people who can walk into their tropical greenhouse full of bananas and papayas when it's 10 feet of snow outside.
New goal unlocked for me. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, you didn't know you wanted that, but you do. And you'll talk to Ceres if you're around here. They're local. Yeah, so they deal with materials that are in some sense brand new or brand new to this industry. So ETFE is one that they've been really studying, and it has been pretty common in architecture. Like if you see a big building and it's got, a strange kind of honeycomb structure to let light in there, it's probably not glass. If it's not a flat sheet, it's not glass. It's plastic that looks like glass. And it lasts a very long time, which is great. and it lets in a lot of light. And they can even make it now in formats that have 2 layers with, supports in between, so that you get a lot of light and you get a lot of insulation, which is unusual. You usually can't do that. The more traditional, the cheapest way to do that is take 2 layers of the cheap poly film and inflate them. But you lose a certain amount of light, usually like 25%, and you have to keep them inflated. It takes energy. And they don't last more than a few years before they become garbage. Plastic garbage that we're trying to avoid.
Mm-hmm.
So the path to regenerative means at first integrating them, like taking the high-tech, high-expenditure, intensive edge off of CEA, trying to let nature do its work, trying to compromise more with nature in terms of, hey, if growing this variety of this crop takes so much money, takes so much chemicals, maybe we shouldn't want that one. And if this one cooperates better, has less pest problems, is more resilient against the weather, then we should favor that. Because our desires and the colors and flavors and everything that we're used to is not the most important thing in the world. Mm-hmm. We've gotten used to luxury as a human species, convenience over all, desires fulfilled. But to become better stewards of the planet, we have to compromise. We got to start taking steps in the direction of like, well, okay, I'll give up this little thing if it's better for the planet. I will learn to like these foods if they can be produced much more sustainably near me and things like that. And so I'm going to have my 4 greenhouses with those crops for starters, and I'm going to be looking at different varieties to make those calls. But I also have a lot of outdoor space.
So will your greenhouses be a blend of CEA and regenerative?
Well, in there, it's CEA, because the physical structure itself is controlling the environment.
Okay.
I get less wind in there than outside, but it's still natural wind.
What's your definition for regenerative? I might be getting just unclear on that.
Regenerative agriculture, to me, and some may agree or disagree, but it's agriculture practice that benefits and enhances the health of the environment that it's being done in. So if I take a cornfield in Kansas and I grow corn on it over and over again, and I put salt on it over and over again, I'm going to get imbalances. I'm going to get erosion. I'm going to get a collapse, basically, of the microbiome of the soil, and eventually I'm going to have to let it lie fallow and recover in natural ways, because what I've been doing to it is damaging it. My agriculture is degenerating it. But there are ways, and some people have already really proved this, so they're great pioneers that we are kind of following up on. You can do agriculture, there's compromises involved, but you can do it in a way that leaves the field that you're doing it in healthier and richer each time you do it. So that means getting away from salt-based fertilizers that harm microbial life and cause imbalances there. It means getting away from pesticides that we use to kill the pests, but they also kill the beneficials, so they cause a collapse of ecosystem. Getting away from all those harmful aspects and learning to live with the balance. Because in, let's say, indigenous agricultural systems, there was an understanding that you're sharing. You're using the land, you're taking from it, but you're also giving to it. The birds have a right to get some of this. The insects have a right to get some of this. Like, you're sharing. You're not the only thing there. You're not the only one that matters. But you still come out on top. You're feeding your people, and that's great. So with a kind of a cultural shift mentally, we can move towards being okay with not getting quite as much, not hitting our quotas, not growing our business every year, and not destroying what is giving us that opportunity to gain from it, So it's basically like the people who mow their grass and bag it up and put it in a plastic bag and send it to a landfill. Those grass clippings belong where you cut them. They get eaten by insects, worms, mold, and turned into things that feed the grass. You don't take it away. Mm-hmm. So in our case, I am taking the food. I'm taking the tomatoes, I'm taking the broccoli, the strawberries, and I'm sending them somewhere else. So something has to go back in. But it can be manure from my neighbor's animals, eating local grass and weeds. It can be leaf and stick litter from the nearby forest that is an abundant supply. And all of this has value. It takes more work for me to process that. It's less convenient. It doesn't come in a bag from the store. It's not water soluble. I have to compost it. So it's my willingness to play that role and put in extra effort to keep things healthy.
What does water usage look like in your greenhouse setup?
That's a good question. It depends on conditions, how fast things are growing, how big they are, what the weather is like, how dry it is, but it's not an enormous amount of water, I'm still going to be using drip irrigation technology, which, granted, right now are plastic tubes. If you were not using that, you would either have to just rely on the rain and hope that it's not too much, not too little, or build canals like they used to, like in ancient Babylon. They would take a piece of the river and channel it here and just have open canals. So you're losing a lot of water every square inch of the way to deliver it there. And it's not very conservative. I don't think we can be that irresponsible. There's also things you can do to your soil to help it hold on to the water that you give it, instead of having it just run through and leave or evaporate quickly. So mulch is a great way of doing that. The first thing that the sun hits is not the soil, but the hay or the chips on top of it, and the water below it and the mycelium in that soil do a good job of keeping things moist and holding on to it. So there's strategies that you can use to lower your water inputs. But man, having access to clean water and fresh water is not to be taken for granted. Most parts of the world don't have that. So like what I'm going to be doing specifically on my plot in that specific location in that country is night and day different than what they have to do in vastly different places. So one of the places where CEA is proving to be most successful is the Gulf states, the Arab Gulf states. They are, for the most part, desert, not a lot of forest, not a lot of rivers, nothing like that. And they have very dry air. So the dry air allows them to use water to cool the air, because you add water to air, you evaporate it, and it brings the temperature down. So that allows them to grow cool weather crops that would die outside. That water has to come from somewhere, and they're desalinating. So they're getting a lot of money from oil. They spend it on solar desalination plants. They use that water to cool and grow crops that they consume because they have those tastes, but they don't really normally grow locally. And it's quite impressive. And at the same time, they're working on terraforming. They're planting trees. They're watering them to get established. They're putting, silica crystals and things underground to give them moisture retention. They're transforming their countries. They're putting all that to very good use. And we can see that and be inspired by that, just like they saw those pieces elsewhere and were inspired by them, putting them together, taking advantage of the opportunity. But every country is different. So what our future looks like is different.
I'm coming through the lens of microgreens. I know the most about growing microgreens. I haven't grown just a little bit in more of like a hobby type way, but getting to see insights into how many farms grow. All the farms that I've ever partnered with grow in soil. Our current farming partner is USDA Organic and Regenerative Organic, which is first in the country to do that. Very, very unique. What do you see for, and within microgreens, there's a lot of hydroponic growers. We've done a lot of lab tests on hydroponic versus soil grown.
What do you see?
What would you guess from a nutritional standpoint?
I guess that certain minerals are higher in the hydroponic ones, but not necessarily the way you want them to be.
On average, soil grown is about twice as nutritious as
Beautiful.
hydroponic. And especially in the very key plant compounds, antioxidants that we're after, sulforaphane for NRF2 activation, anthocyanins, and other polyphenols, about twice as much. So that's like great. If you have the choice of buying hydroponically grown versus soil grown, seems like you'll get a lot, and at the same price, seems like you'll get a lot more value for the soil grown.
I agree, and that's my preference too. I assume the nitrates are higher in the hydroponic ones, but that's not what you want. It is exactly what you mentioned over there that takes balance. Like those plants are healthier themselves because they're getting everything they need from a natural system, and those farmers don't even fully understand how it's working. They don't have to. The hydroponic farm is putting in every single thing that the plants are getting. They pay for it, they formulate it, they put it in there. They are God in that equation. And they don't make very good gods compared to the natural universe, you know? So I'm not surprised.
What do you see as the future of hydroponics, knowing that a lot of these mega farms have raised incredible sums of money and failed? My understanding is most of those are hydroponic. What's the future? And you have such a deep history and experience in hydroponics. Where does that have a place, and what's the future look like for hydroponics, which simply means grown without soil? Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The future from where I'm sitting as a specialist in that area is that the approach has to get simpler, leaner. The fewer parts we can use, the better. The more long-lasting those parts, the better. So let's say systems should be ebb and flow, most likely, made of stainless steel, things that you're committing to using for forever, for generations, right? Things that work out the issues of too many moving parts cause problems in maintenance, too many constrictions cause clogs and things like that. So that's the first thing, is we have to work plastics out of the equation somehow. They are cheap and easy to get and easy to replace in our petroleum economy, but that has to go away. The second most important thing is the fertilizer, which predominantly, 99% right now, is salt-based fertilizers that come from mined salts. They all require, strip mines, and then a lot of them are also processed to be purified and formulated in laboratories. That can't go on forever. That's not going to work. That has definitely contributed to increasing our success, and so now that's the standard. The organically derived stuff actually has to compete with that in terms of performance. But if something comes from the food waste that we have in our society, or natural forest waste or agricultural waste, that's something we can reliably count on having forever. And so there's a much better source for that. And that might still be processed in a factory of sorts, in stainless steel vats, using natural organisms that already do these things in nature. We just use them to do what they do. We don't have to make chemicals to do that. But that's the future of hydroponics. If it's going to stick around, it's actually going to become less of a production tool as we get a better handle on how to build and maintain healthy soils, and more of a research tool and more of an emergency measure.
So thoughts on investing in the hydroponic space today?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like you're not that hot on it.
I am, and it's still what I do. And when people know that that's what they want, I help them avoid mistakes and mitigate risks and things like that. But to those investors, I say, keep it stupid simple. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you're not following fancy dreams of smoke and mirrors and things like that and going for the sexy system. What you want is what works really well. And we're far enough into it right now to know what that is. And we continue to do experiments to show that, other things work too. One aspect of it, why I mentioned ebb and flow, for example. I didn't invent that. That's at least the 50s. It's an irrigation system, and somebody invented this for nurseries to put seedling flats, pots, big trees,
Where you flood a tray and then it drains.
Where you flood a tray and it drains. So you don't have a bunch of plastic drip lines. You don't have anything that can get clogged. You don't have anything to replace. It just sits there. We've done experiments on growing crops hydroponically in those systems. It takes, small alterations to the irrigation system to make it a hydroponic system. And we've ended up calling that SAFE, shallow arrow ebb and flow. And
Did you coin that?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, in grad school. And it was targeting the existing conventional hydroponic systems that are also well established, that are specialized, that work really well for what they do, but they have flaws and they have limitations. So we wanted to take something existing off the shelf, not reinvent the wheel, and formulate it in a way that it took account of those flaws, like worked them out, took advantage of the strengths, and stayed very versatile. So the thing about the future is nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. We're sitting here guessing, and the fact is you have to do as much as you can to be prepared for possibilities. So when it comes to building a new hydroponic farm, you think you know what you're going to grow, and we can do a market study and figure out what we're going to start with. But things can change. Competition can come up and undercut you growing that thing. Demand can change. Culture can change. Wars can affect, distribution and things like this. So you need to make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to change your mind and change your crop. So ebb and flow.
So a flexible
A
system.
flexible system. It's not specialized
A system
for
that you
anything.
can grow microgreens in, and you can grow heads of lettuce.
Or cannabis, or tomatoes, or trees, or turf. Your choice.
What is the state of AI, automation, and robotics in farming today? Maybe at the medium size that you're kind of specializing, that you specialize in, and what does the future look like?
Very good question. So the biggest investments into that are coming from northern latitudes where the cost of labor is the highest. So number one, we're talking about things that take a lot of labor. And to have someone do it at 80,000 sterling pounds a year means it's taking a big chunk of your margin, right? And if that person gets sick, the work stops, And if there are pandemics, then perhaps the immigrants that you're relying on don't come. Or if you have regimes that are kicking people out based on status, then that can be really easily disrupted. So that's where the products they're growing cost the most, and the labor is the highest value. So they're diving deep into like AI, vision, robotics, with even like soft touch, things that can pick strawberries and peppers and tomatoes and things like that. That's the forefront, because that's the difficult stuff. Pruning your plants. They have a blade, they got to cut the right spot. It means a computer is looking at it, processing, so on and so forth. And there are some that are already viable. Right now, they don't work very fast, but they work all day and all night. So big enough companies that have the capital and have a lot of employees are jumping on that and driving it. But the next level of that for the medium farms is the things that help their people who are doing tedious things do them much more efficiently, so that you don't have to spend your whole day doing something, or it doesn't take three of you to do something. And that's more like the automatic seeders and harvesters for greens and things like that, or the power washing assembly belts.
I just had Max Knight in here with Rooted Robotics.
He's awesome.
He's
and their
awesome.
company is doing fantastic things.
And he's focused more on the small scale.
Which we appreciate.
Very much so. Equipment that costs maybe closer to $10,000,
Exactly.
where before it was $50,000. And they're working their way into the medium scale farming. But
Making it
massive
accessible.
help. And that's backbreaking. And no farmer is getting into business to wash hundreds of trays a day or a week.
Right. So imagine a future where we're taking advantage of indigenous knowledge and integrating our CEA with soil-based ecological systems, and at the same time realizing that no one throughout history ever wanted to do tedious things all day. And then focusing our robotic efforts on that stuff. Okay? I don't want robots making decisions. I don't want them making art. That's not what we can get out of them that really benefits us best. It's the tedious things. Let people enjoy their life and write and do art and, walk through their farms, taking a close look at their plants without feeling burned out and stressed and things like this. And let the robots do the tedious things that they do better.
And when it comes to the AI side of things, what's your outlook on that? Is that more of a friend or a foe?
It's a tool. And any tool can be, a weapon. Now, here's what I can say about it. It's very powerful. When it's set up correctly, it's very powerful. It can increase efficiency like mad. It can speed up progress of, let's say, research or development, things like that. And I would never trust it. That's not how we should use it. We should not use it in a trusting sense. In other words, it does a lot of data crunching. It does a lot of pattern analysis. The things that we can do, specialized people can do, but we do it slowly. It does it fast. So let it do that, and then double check its work always. Don't let it control anything. Don't let it make decisions without passing through a qualified human first. The other side of it is that it's extremely energy intensive. And maybe companies will come through. I think, the one that dropped in China, what was that called?
I know what you're talking.
DeepSeek.
I think you're right.
DeepSeek.
Like 10th the amount of power as
Exactly.
ChatGPT.
So that's
supposedly
cool.
that could be.
Supposedly, I really hope
propaganda.
so, because
Yeah.
ChatGPT was raising alarms about how, tons of people starting to use it for mediocre stuff that AI doesn't need to be doing. Write my book report, and that took enormous amounts of power.
Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, ChatGPT, just came out and said it's costing the company tens of millions of dollars by people just saying please and thank you to it. So just that, and they should be able to figure that out, but just that small amount, it creates such a huge amount of energy.
Yeah, and I have a feeling that those people doing that don't really understand that. But it's a consideration. I mean, we need to use less energy. That helps our chances of shifting to better energy. If we keep using more and more energy as if it's unlimited, that is going to incentivize the corporations that deliver our energy to get into dirty energy and stick to it and do a lot of nuclear plants and things that are high risk and high damage. I'm not saying nuclear is bad. I'm saying it's high risk.
Certainly the nuclear plant technology of 50, 60 years ago. I'm not sure what the state of nuclear
it's changed
is in the U.S.
Yeah.
Have we built a new plant in a long time? I think there's places in the world like France that are really leading in that kind of a way, and there's no more the risk of having some, I don't know the terminology, like meltdown, where
Right.
there's caps on either end of it and it can be flooded and just neutralized. Whereas before it's like, it's we've got an atom bomb here and we have no way of controlling it.
Yeah, and they know the risks, so they try to take them into account. It's good when you don't cut corners and things. But everyone is very excitedly anticipating fusion, the type that is not only efficient and produces little waste, but that consumes its own waste and is cool and has like virtually no risk of meltdown at all. I actually saw a news article out of China where they made nuclear small batteries that work for years without being recharged. Like imagine a 50-year battery in your phone. Now I wonder, like, does the radioactivity radiate
Fry
out?
you,
Yeah,
right.
I don't know. But it's interesting. I just know that, when it comes to countries like Canada and Brazil, they have a situation where they can take advantage of hydroelectric a lot. That has rare earth magnets in it as well, so those had to be mined. But then they last a lifetime or more.
We take advantage of that here in Colorado.
Oh, yeah.
The snow melt creates such a huge amount of water in certain times of the year. It's coming down too fast for our
Watershed.
domestic pipes, and so they have it go through these hydroelectric turbines where they're capturing energy and slowing down the water from the mountains.
That's really beautiful. It's really constant. It's very, very clean energy, but you wonder if that'll stay the same in 50 years with those glaciers disappearing slowly. I don't know. Those of us who will not be alive in 50 years have to just make sure that we're minimizing our damage and in some ways getting out of the way. It's the next generation that is going to really prepare everything for the big shift. Sometimes less is more. And when it comes to, let's say, the boomers who are still alive, it's like, please just don't do any more damage. That's the best you can do. But when it comes to figuring out the solutions to the problems that we haven't even faced yet, it's impossible without knowing what they are. And there are people trying to imagine what they could be, and that helps. I read a book recently called 2084. It's like 1984, but for the next century. And it's set in the year 2084. I read it in Portuguese as an exercise. But it's interviewing different people in the year 2084 about the past century and just complete societal collapses and ecosystem.
So similar
shifts.
to the book 1984, but just in the future.
Yeah, and this had a lot less to do with, fascist governments and a lot more to do with a changing planet. But that had a gross effect on everyone's energy and everyone's food and everyone's agriculture and tourism and even political relationships and so on and so forth, demographics. It was definitely interesting.
So you share the next generation is preparing us for the big shift. What are you envisioning for that? What is that big shift?
Well, the core principle that is going to be the most fundamental foundation of that is that the younger generation here is better connected to each other than ever. People who
Technologically?
Technologically.
But and maybe not personally.
Maybe not. We can only hope that element survives. But they have an easier time of identifying with other people far away, as we, Me and my friends in China and Sweden and Africa and South America are we.
Because I could be on a video call with you
Yeah.
anywhere in the world, and it's like I'm right there.
So that's the positive side of globalization. Starting to think of humanity as a race, the family. Starting to think of the planet as a home, as a unit, like not living in little nationalist and clique silos anymore. So that gives them a better chance of tackling the problems that are more dire than ever, which at this point, we've never faced it before. We're talking about the survival of the planet, or life on the planet. Because the planet will be around as a rock for a long time. But life is more fragile than we've realized. We found that out by doing irreparable damage to it. You know what I mean? There's so many species that don't exist anymore that were around 100 years ago or 200 years ago, and that's almost entirely our fault. You know, it's making clear our power to safeguard that stuff and steward these natural systems and, you know, integrate what we do into it so that we're cooperating with it, versus overpower and just do a scorched earth, like I know better than you, nature, let me wipe the slate clean, put a parking lot here and do what I think is best. That hasn't worked out. I think that's definitive now. The Industrial Revolution took us outside of mass poverty and famine and all of these things, which had to happen, just like capitalism got us out of feudal systems where it doesn't matter how hard you work, doesn't matter how good of a businessman, you're lower class, stay there. These are stepping stones. But even capitalism has expired, its usefulness. And the Industrial Revolution has to change from an electrical, mechanical nature to now biological. And that's where you see some interesting things happening in synthetic biology. It's misleading because you're not starting from scratch. You have to have biology to make more biology. But they're making machines that are alive, using cells and tissues to do what robots would. And there's no metal involved. There's no circuitry involved. You're programming biology. You're giving the DNA instructions to do things.
Can you give us an example? I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, it's in very early stages, but they make little muscular machines that really just respond to impulses and go and grab things or stretch things or push things. It's fascinating. Where it will go is really up to that new generation, because it's only going to get developed when you and I are very old, to the point where it can be very, very useful tools or weapons. Weapons destroy, tools build. And that's the choice we have to make day after day after day, is what we're investing in. So the United States, as a company, as a government, is very, very much imbalanced right now. It's heavily, heavily invested in weapons, destruction, at a rate of about 10 to 1 compared to what we do in terms of building and fixing and so on and so forth.
We're something like the gun store for the rest of the world.
Yeah, and that's a sickness, you know, to think that filling your pockets that way makes anything better for you or your family or anything like that is an illusion, because it quickly gets out of your control. You know, we care about Ukraine, for example. We should care about anyone being invaded, but we care about Europeans being invaded. And so we want to help them. And like all Americans pretty much see that and want to help. And we don't know how, because it's complicated and we're not sure what to do. Sending food is great. Sending medicine, great. Well, the U.S. government tells us that we need to also send a bunch of weapons. Hard to know if that's really the right call, but weapons are exclusively for destruction, so you're trying to help them defend themselves by destroying the enemy. Fair enough. But now it's becoming very obvious that the vast majority of those weapons that we sent them, they didn't even use. They sold. And by they, I mean corrupt individuals on the front lines and things who, you know, had these in their charge. So now Europe and beyond are getting flooded with these weapons. And I very much doubt that the people in charge here that made those decisions ultimately weren't aware that that would happen. They didn't care. They didn't care, and they thought it wouldn't affect them. You know, so the next generation has much more capacity than the past generations to expand what they care about, who they care about, what they care about, and what they do about it. And that's very exciting. They're our only hope, in a sense, you know, because we can destroy this planet in 100 years, or we can carry on living harmoniously and happily in prosperity for another 1,000 or 2 or more.
Now, you had a major health challenge recently. Has that shifted your perspective on life, health, your work?
Yeah, it's changed everything for me to the point where obviously I don't wish cancer on anybody else. But I'm happy that I went through that. And I'm still going through that. I still have it. But yeah, the first thing it did for me was challenge my sense of self-value. Because I was a smart guy and a hard-working guy, objectively. I got a lot of opportunity to get educated, and I was taught good work ethic, and so that's why I thought I had worth. I have worth because I'm smart and I work hard. And then I end up in a hospital bed where I ain't working and I'm not useful to anybody in any way, shape, or form. So am I still valuable? Yes, I'm alive and I'm a human. And I had to think about that. I really had to sit and think about that. That I derive my value from my existence. In other words, you have no obligation to do anything with your life other than not hurt other people. Nobody can tell you, you have to go to college, you have to build a business, you have to solve problems. No, you don't have to. Ask the indigenous. They understood, fundamentally, that you have to be a net positive. But your life is yours. You enjoy it. Second thing was workaholism. I was proud of working too much. I was grinding and hustling and taking pride, like validating and justifying it, the suffering, the stress, for no good reason. And now I don't see it that way. I work a lot less than I used to, and I get just as much done, and I have more fun projects that I pour my time into, and I rest more, and I take better care of myself because I was procrastinating some of that. I was also procrastinating some of my passions, like a lot of people do, Oh, I'll do this when things settle down. I'll do this when the business takes off. I'll do it when I retire. As if those things are guaranteed. They're not. Your business may never take off. You may never retire. So if there's something you care about, and it's true, you need to act like it. For me, it's music. I love music. I'm good at it. I want to continue to learn about it. I want to continue to create it. I love performing it. So that also prompted me to stop my 12-year break, like getting serious into college and having too much homework and so on and so forth. I stopped playing music very much. Now I'm back into it like I'm making up for lost time. And I'm getting a lot done in a short time. I've enlisted the help of a lot of wonderful people. I've built a band that's a collective that's multinational now. We played a lot of shows. We've come out with a lot of music. Check out Culture Maker by Phoenix anywhere, because that just came out. That's a part of it.
How would you describe your music?
Well, I've decided to put it in the reggae category because, I've explored a lot. And the thing about reggae is it easily accepts and integrates with almost any other music. Reggae can be jazzy, bluesy, rocky, punky, Arabic, Asian, it's very accepting. So that's the foundation there, reggae. And I worked in the Caribbean a lot and been very inspired by some of the Rasta farmers that I've met there and their whole approach to life, and they're very proud of themselves, and they should be, They sacrifice to hold to their ethics. They contribute good to everyone around them. They work very hard. They play very hard. It's wonderful. But the music is medicine music, message music. Very seldom are we talking about shaking our booties. That's a part of life, of course. I'm not leaving it out. But what is the bigger opportunity right now is to talk about the real stuff happening that is threatening our harmony and health and prosperity, and empower people not only to not look away, please, look at this. This is real. There is war, there is violence, there's injustice, sexism, racism, slavery. But I'm not saying this just to bring you down, because guess what? We're very powerful together. If we unite, we can fix all of that in a very short time. So it's kind of a call to action, is to make you move your body, listen up, relax yourself, inspire you to take care of yourself, love yourself, be healthy, be happy, and also be all you can be for the world. Not in terms of you have to, but you can. And if you want to, join us, because we're doing this, And the song Culture Maker is about that. It starts with words, their action. You literally move to speak. Thoughts can have traction. Let me show you how to do it. And then there's a verse about honesty, integrity, and reliability. Things that we need to meditate on, because I feel like people are letting go of those. Like they're stressed, they're lied to, they're propagandized, they're poisoned, they don't feel good. So they kind of just want to go inwards and stop caring about other people and the planet because they don't feel like they have the capacity. And then they're going to complain about the culture, which is valid. There's things not to like about how we do things collectively, but you can't let it end there because you have the power to shape culture more than you realize. As a drop in the bucket, you and everybody else have that vote of like, what do we want it to be like where we live? What do we want the future of our world to look like? And how do we achieve that? You decide what's important to you, and you act like it. At every chance you get, to sacrifice a little bit of time or energy or money or convenience to push the needle in that direction.
This podcast is brought to you by Be Micro, organic freeze-dried microgreens for easy, natural nutrition. Sprinkle them on any meal and enjoy the benefits. Shop now at bemicro.farm and use code STEVE15 to save.
JC, thank you very much.
Yeah, brother.
Appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
What's something that you'd like to share with people before we go here? Listen.
Well, as you well know, plants are awesome. It's the foundation for our well-being on the planet, quite frankly. Like, we would be nothing without plants on the planet. So if you're feeling inspired to do it, get proactive with your plants, whether it's the beautiful ones that uplift us, whether it's the healthy ones that fuel us. You can do yourself and your community and your farmers a favor by getting proactive at whatever level you're at right now. You know, whether it's getting to know a farmer and getting a little bit closer to your food, making sure the money, stays local and benefits, or growing microgreens, which are super fun and convenient to grow, or beyond that, take an active role in making sure that our relationship with plants stays strong.
And where can people find out more about you, listen to your music, learn about your projects, your consulting, the ways that you support different farms?
Yeah, thanks for that. It's Culty Bio Ltd, CultiBio.com is our website for the consulting firm. And we're growing, we're taking on partners, and we're expanding our reach. We've been international since the start. But we love what we do, and we help people get into farming, solve their problems in farming, we help people help farmers. So it's very much focused on that, food and medicine, and sometimes ornamental. And then the music is all under Phoenix Reggae on all social media and streaming platforms. It's FINIXREGGAE, Phoenix Reggae, medicine, music, and we talk about plants there too, quite frankly.
This might be a little on the spot, but can you leave us with a few bars?
Well, actually, there's a brand new one that I'm trying to digest here. So since there's no music and anything, I'll sing as a preview of something that hasn't been made yet. And it says, love is a weapon and we wield it. Whoa, love is a weapon and we wield it. Yeah, fighting oppression when we meet it. Seeking the truth and we reveal it. Yeah, earth is a heaven, so redeem it. Life is the lesson, so believe it, yeah. Love is a weapon and we wield it. Whoa, love is a weapon and we wield it. And there's verses that go with that, but those you have to stick around for.
Thank you, brother.
Yeah, brother.
Love
Thank you so much. Love you too. And really glad we got to hang out here and have other people benefit from it at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Lucky us.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Be Micro.
Yay. Thanks for wearing the throwback. Appreciate that.
It's one of my favorite t-shirts. This is going to Brazil.
Nice. Oh, good.